What do you do when you're not building muscle and not losing fat as fast as you would like? Maybe it is you're putting all the effort in the gym. Maybe you're also putting all that effort in the kitchen as well with your meal prep. But actually, the results that you're seeing aren't quite as fast as you'd A, hoped and B, expected. And you're at this crossroads where you're not quite sure if you're doing the right thing, if there's something you're missing, if there's a missing ingredient to the gains cake that you're missing, that you need to try and unearth and unpick and add into the mix so you can get the results that you are expecting and that you desperately want. That's the topic of today's podcast. Now, today's podcast comes from a fan question. It comes from a lady called Merin. Now, Merin donated to the podcast. She donated a small donation to the podcast, which I'm eternally grateful for. And in return for that, she asked a question. And now we're going to go into detail about this particular topic specific to her. And we're going to go through some of the things that are specific to her situation, but also some of the overarching concepts that you can also take away and implement into your own situation. If you're in this kind of dilemma where you can't quite figure out what it is that you need to be doing, you can't quite put your finger on what's not kind of clicking for you. And of course, if you want to donate to the podcast, then you can absolutely do that. There's a link in the show notes below. So if you also want to ask a question and have me go into the detail like this that I'm about to right now, then once you place a donation on PayPal, you can add a little note. In that little note, that's where you ask your question. So let's get cracking with this particular episode by going through the specific question and some of the details that Merin provided for me so that I can kind of give you a bit of background and a bit of context as to what's going on here. So she's been going to the gym for 2 decades, but in the last 18 months decided to start lifting seriously. So in my mind, I'm just going to talk over, sort of interject as we go through this particular set of scenarios, just to give my thoughts as I go through, as maybe like give you an insight as to kind of what clicks in my head as like if this was a coaching client or something like that. Obviously, if it's a coaching client, I probably have more information. I probably go into a little bit more detail with them, trying to unpick some of the things that are going on here, but you'll get the idea. So been lifting seriously for now 18 months. So for me, that's still relative beginner territory, albeit she's been training for 2 decades before then, so not exactly inexperienced. But in terms of skill level and actually the amount of muscle that's maybe been built, if you only have taken it seriously in the last 12 to 18 months, to me, that's still in beginner territory. So that's the first thing that's kind of lodging in the back of my mind. It's a 4-week training program, minimal cardio, working your ass off each session, progressively overloading each week, and definitely getting stronger. Now, that's my first kind of, not necessarily red flag, but would be my first sort of question point. When someone says for 18 months they've been progressively overloading every single week, that just says to me, okay, well, I don't think anybody should be able to progressively overload for 18 months, week after week after week. There are going to be periods of time where it's a struggle. It's kind of like a grind to eke out an extra rep or to add a little bit of weight to the bar or something like that. It's never going to be a case where you are just going to get this linear progression from 1 week to the next, where it's always up and away with your weights, with how many reps you're doing and things like that. There's going to be some periods where you need to like ebb and flow. There's going to be periods where you might want to deload and back off for 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 weeks, where you're just going to take the volume a little bit easier. So that would be the first thing. Obviously, we need to be able to dig into this programming a little bit more to find out what's going on there. But also, I would be asking the question is how much is being focused on form at the same time? So yes, there's a progressive overload from maybe reps, sets, weight, all of the above. But what about actual form itself? Are we executing those exercises better, creating more torque and tension on those muscles to try and build them up? There's maybe sneaking behind this a technique sort of question that we would focus on. So if this was a client of mine and I had this sort of background here, I might say to them something along the lines of, well, let's film maybe 3 or 4 of the exercises that I put into a program. Maybe they're the core fundamental exercises, and I want to see what the execution is like on those particular exercises. So then I can see, okay, is there a particular form issue that we need to work on? maybe it's not like a horrendous thing like the exercise has been doing completely wrong, but it might be the case that we need to tweak and adjust so that we're actually getting the most out of their exercise when it comes to an hypertrophy perspective. So for about 9 months, she followed the Renaissance periodization strength templates and found the volume required left her too sore, and eventually realized responds better to higher weight and lower volume, 3 to 4 sets instead of up to 9. So in this scenario, again, there would be a little sort of a not necessarily a warning thing, but maybe in terms of when you're looking at the Renaissance periodization way of programming, is that the volume landmarks that they provide, so you're thinking about maximum recoverable volume, minimum effective volume, those volume landmarks by muscle group are guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules for everybody. So for example, let's say you were doing 20 sets of chest, and that was I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but let's assume 20 sets of chest is the recommended MRV for chest. Now, if when you do your chest workouts that you get to like 16 sets per week for chest, and that's the point where you can't now recover between sessions, that's theoretically your MRV. And there you have to reset all of the volume landmarks back from that. So it's maybe not a case that the high volume stuff doesn't work. It might be a case that you need to tweak and adjust and adapt it so that it starts to fit in with your own body and how you respond to those exercises. Because the other thing that is in this scenario as well is if you can execute exercises really, really well, then potentially that creates more fatigue, it creates more stimulus on the muscle. Maybe that then means that you don't need to do as many sets to hit your MRV because you are so good at executing those exercises, you don't need that volume to get that output. So again, that can be an advantage of being able to perform exercises really, really well, is that you don't necessarily have to do that to get to that point. And so there are these little subtleties within these different training approaches that you need to adapt and adjust and change and make them fit your particular scenario. But lower volume approaches still work. So I use lower volume approaches in my own training, with some of my clients' training. It really depends on who you've got in front of you. Now, if you've tried the higher volume stuff, maybe you did try a tweak to some of those volume landmarks and it still didn't work, then maybe it's a case of, okay, now you're getting response from that lower volume work. Great. Maybe there's no need to change from that. But if you're not quite building the muscle that you want to build, maybe it's a case that, there are so many different component parts to building muscle that you have to get right in order, if you want to really build the most amount of muscle you can possibly build, is that there's a lot of moving parts. So you've got exercise selection, you've got the resistance profiles of those exercises, you've got how you execute it, the volume, all of these different factors play into the situation. She also mentions that she is training to failure all the time with 2 days upper and 2 days lower split. Now, again, training to failure is not necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't train to failure all the time. I wouldn't have that as my stock protocol of how I'm going to lift, because if you think about it, if you're training to failure with every set and every exercise, there's going to be a point where you're accumulating so much fatigue in one session that subsequent exercises and subsequent sets are likely to be compromised. So for example, if maybe you were to come 1 or 2 reps back from failure, could you lift a few more reps in the next set and the set after that and in the next exercise, thereby creating more overload for those particular muscles by just holding back a fraction? Maybe it is a case that you do push to failure on certain situations, certain exercises where it's good to do so. Maybe it's towards the last exercise of a workout, or where you're just benching and you kind of really want to push that on that particular day, then you can do that. So again, it's necessary to understand and adjust kind of what's working for you. And yes, you might feel great from training to failure, feel like you work really, really hard, but has that impact the amount of actual weight and mass you are able to move by increasing that level of fatigue? Then moving on to nutrition. So nutritionally, you've tracked religiously on MyFitnessPal. I've played around with macro ratios, but always obtained at least 2 grams per kilo of protein. Now, that's fine. So let's firstly clear up the macro ratios are not the issue whatsoever. So macro ratios, so macro splits, so whether it's like, the classic one is 40, 40, 20, 40% protein, 40% carbohydrate, 20% fat, really doesn't do anything special for building muscle or losing fat for that matter. The only, beyond helping you perform better in the gym, no macro split is going to make you perform any worse or any better. If having slightly higher carbohydrates in your diet helps you to perform better, then yes, there's a reason for you to have not necessarily like a specific and rigid macro split, but maybe you favor carbohydrates in that macro split and you have slightly less fat. Whereas if you don't find that extra carbohydrates makes any real difference on your training, then you can have complete freedom between, what your carb and fat ratios are going to be. So keeping it 2 grams per kilo is fine. The ratios between carbs and fat really kind of make that whatever is going to get the most out of each and every training session. Now, the next part really confused me to start with, and then I think I twigged what was going on. So he said, at the moment, I'm eating 8,293 calories. I was like, fuck me, that's a lot of fucking calories. 8,293. And that's come up from 7,300 calories. Fuck me. So I only have like my maintenance is anywhere between sort of like 3.1, 3.3, something like that. So I was like, fuck me, 8,293 calories. And then I thought, must be weekly. So my maths was then saying, okay, right, weekly, 8,293 is 1,185 calories per day, which kind of makes sense. It may be on the low side, but it kind of makes sense. Although this person is actually quite light. So at 49 kilos, not exactly heavy. So maybe that's part of why the calories are a little bit low. But I would say that is quite low on the calorie side. So you're 51 kilos right now, 166 centimeters and 43 years old. Over the past 14 months, your weight has fluctuated between like 49 and 52. You've had moderate body comp changes, but nothing like I would have thought I would have achieved with so much bloody hard work in the gym. Dedication to tracking macros. So my question is this is the crux of it. Are my expectations unrealistic to have an Insta-worthy buff body, or is it still achievable and I just need to keep chipping away? Am I doing anything wrong? And provided a couple of pictures as well. So from the couple of pictures, I would say that saying that you have a modest amount of body composition changes is an incorrect statement. Now, I won't put your picture on camera for the world to see, but the changes between those two pictures are significant. There's a significant body fat reduction. You can see abs, all that sort of stuff is there. So I would not be so harsh on yourself to say that you haven't had a significant body composition change. So first of all, get that into your head is that you have made a significant amount of progress, and a lot of progress that many people won't achieve ever. So have that in your mind as well. The other thing is the Insta-worthy buff body statement. That's an immediate red flag to maybe say that mindset-wise, you're in the wrong place. Because if you're comparing yourself to Insta bodies, don't forget that they are dieting specifically for photo shoots. They have amazing lighting, amazing photography, likely to be photoshopped, all of the above. They are not necessarily the realistic day-to-day physiques that you want to actually try. I mean, if you want to try and emulate at all, you really should be your own person. But let's say you are trying to emulate something. Remember all of these factors is that when you look at yourself in the mirror and you're in front of the bathroom mirror or your mirror in front of your wardrobe or whatever, you haven't got amazing lighting. Well, you might have, I don't know. And you haven't got like a professional photographer and you're not touching up those photos in Photoshop just to make sure that all like little corrections are there and stuff like that, and any sort of extra lighting touches can be done. Not saying like they're completely making it up, but you can touch up photos to make them look epic. So really, really bear that in mind, is that don't have this lofty goal that is unrealistic for a day-to-day physique. That would be the first thing. And remember as also what it takes. I mean, I don't know what an Insta buff body means. What's the definition of that? But let's assume like it's like very, very lean on abs and things like that. And remember, so those people, let's say you're comparing it to someone who goes on stage and competes in a bodybuilding competition or of some description. So again, they're dieting for a specific like couple of days or a week or something like that. They're not keeping that physique all year round. And again, it comes with lighting and things like that. So bear in mind that when you're setting those expectations, understand what it takes to get there. Because not only the fact that they are dieting for that specific day is that often, especially from a female perspective, is that it can compromise health to a certain degree for that period of time. I mean, it can compromise health for longer if you try to sustain it. But many women, when they step on stage, are at the stage of they're losing their period because their calories are so low and have been so chronically low for a period of time. Now, that may not be a significant health issue if it's only for a short, finite amount of time. But again, it's not exactly the most healthful way to try to emulate and try to be on a day-to-day basis. So remember that. So the other thing I would say is that from what I'm seeing here, so again, for people who are obviously not exactly this person, but you're in this situation where you're training for the last 18 months and maybe not seeing the amount of muscle that you wanted to build. So the first point of call, whenever it is the case that you are not building muscle, always look at your training. Training is basically the main driver for everything when it comes to build muscle. So start there. Are you executing exercises effectively? That's where I would start. Start with the form. Are you creating tension? Are you creating torque? Are you using good exercises for those particular muscle groups? Are you looking at progressive overload, not just from reps and sets and weight on the bar, but also from how you're performing that exercise as well? So start with that training program and make sure those things, those variables that you control are actually kind of right there. Now, if in this situation, low volume seems to be working, then great, stick with that. Keep looking at that progressive overload. When it comes to the nutrition side of things, protein is the next most important thing. Now, in this case, 2 grams per kilo is absolutely fine. For a female, you probably go as low as like 1.6, 1.8 and still make good gains on that. And again, macro ratios really don't matter beyond what helps you to achieve the most things in the gym or lift the most weight in the gym. That's kind of where you want to be at. Then when we come to calories, I think this is probably where I would start with in this scenario. Often what you find is that people who are desperate to lose body fat, lose weight, they just see it as they're always on this constant hamster wheel of lower the calories, I'm not seeing the results, so it's lower the calories, lower the calories. I know in this situation they've gone slightly up, but they've not gone significantly up. I think if you look at the numbers, it's like 1,042 up to 1,185. So it's a really negligible amount of calorie increase. So in this scenario, I would say I would take a diet break. I would come out of your diet. I would push up to maintenance for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. And that would allow any metabolic adaptations, which we've spoken about before in previous episodes, where your body is down regulating certain functions. That would allow your body to start reversing those things. I think then it would be putting you in a better place in terms of mood. I think you would have obviously you'll be starting from a higher calorie point. So maybe then you reassess your calorie targets. You're replenishing glycogen, you're replenishing energy levels. You're taking this little bit of a reset on your body to then go into another phase of dieting. Just chronically dieting for week and week and week and month after month after month after year is not the way to do it. I would do it almost in little sprints. I would say go, depending on like if you're a beginner, maybe like shorter sort of sprints for losing weight, because sometimes like psychologically it can kind of get to you. So maybe like 8 to 12 weeks, just go 8 to 12 weeks, 4 weeks off, 8 to 12 weeks, 4 weeks off. That can be a great strategy. Another great strategy is 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So you go 2 weeks at a deficit, maybe you push that quite aggressive, and then you go 2 weeks to maintenance, 2 weeks aggressive, 2 weeks to maintenance. And what that does is that you are pushing that calorie deficit for that 2 week period, but you also, in your mind, it's not got this never ending finish point where you just feel like you're on a perpetual diet. You say, right, I just need to be super focused now for 2 weeks. And then I get a 2 week break at maintenance. You're not putting on body fat at that maintenance point. You're just taking that break. And you can you could do 4 weeks and then 2 weeks off, 4 weeks and then 2 weeks off if you wanted. You can do any sort of variation you want. It's the principle of doing it in a little sprint. And I think that in this situation, the first thing that I would do is reset right back to maintenance and say, right, let's sit at maintenance for 2 to 4 weeks. Let's get our nutrients up. Let's get protein in the right place. Let's get like the fat as a minimum in terms of the minimum amount of fat you need for health. Let's get that in the right place. Let's get supplements. Let's get sleep. Let's get everything optimized. And sometimes I would do this with a client and call it a primer phase. Basically, if they're in a pretty poor place nutritionally, not saying this person is in a poor place nutritionally, but either in a poor place nutritionally or struggling to make progress, maybe it's a case that we just need to prime this person ready for dieting. Rather than just launch straight into a diet, we go through a priming phase. Now, what I would therefore do is, again, push it up to maintenance, focus on nutrient content of the diet, focus on filling your diet with all the sorts of foods and that are going to help you when it comes to the dieting phase. Then all it's a matter of doing is just dropping those calories once you actually then drop into that diet. You're not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel of what you're actually eating. You're already there. So a diet break for this particular person, just to go back up to maintenance, have a little bit of a reset, and then see where you go from there. Now, I hope this episode of the show was also beneficial to a lot of you out there that are also in this position where you're trying to build muscle and it's just not kind of clicking for you. Trying to lose body fat and that's not kind of clicking for you. Hopefully it's given you some ideas to take away and implement into your own training and your own nutrition strategies as well. And of course, if you want to donate to the podcast, you can absolutely do that. There's a link in the show notes below. And like I said before at the beginning, you can leave a note with your question as well, and I will answer it just as I have this one here for you as well. Also, as well, there are links to various different resources that you can get. So maybe you want to calculate how many calories you can eat to achieve your goals. There's a free calorie calculator. You can access that in the show notes below. You can also check out my one-to-one coaching program, the Lean Life Method. So if you want me to take control of training and nutrition, sort it all out for you and kind of put you on the right path to success, you can check that out on imparadisefitness.com as well. And of course, if you liked the video you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe. If you liked it and you listen on the podcast, a rate and review would be absolutely awesome too. But for now, all I'm going to say is thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.